We have in this 3-part series reached the present day. The first 2 videos discussed Police Quest and the SWAT series, a direct lineage begun near the dawn of PC gaming, reaching the mid-2000s. With the convoluted transfer of company ownership between Vivendi and Activision, Sierra Online is gone, and the SWAT series is deader than disco. I mean, I'd still hear Staying Alive every so often, but I don't see SWAT 4 being played in hair salons and dentist waiting rooms so much. I said it a couple times now, but it's worth repeating. The SWAT series really was unreplicated, unsurpassed in what it was trying to do, be a SWAT team action simulator. There was not at any point in my memory of all the 2000s a tactical shooter title that was anything other than a kill box. And SWAT wasn't just a kill box with extra steps. Nobody was trying to represent the mission of law enforcement at its best. Not to be judge or executioner or extra-legal governmental assassin, but just to enforce the law in a way that is recognizable to our body and tradition of law, and in extreme cases, bring order to chaos. To do that is a difficult challenge from a game design perspective. You have to make realistic maps that still have mechanical depth. You have to make AI that simulates fear, brazenness, and calculated cunning, is both somewhat readable but still deadly and unpredictable. You have to make the shooting mechanics smooth and snappy, but not laser sharp or overpowered. You have to make the failure of the player possible not only from being shot, but from shooting at the wrong target or at the wrong time, like a similarly dressed civilian or a complying suspect. You have to make this failure easy enough to keep players from running and gunning through maps like it was Rainbow Six, but not so gray that they don't know when they can shoot. Making a kill box is easy in comparison. It's not surprising that this is a type of game that existed very briefly with the SWAT series, with a development ethos and fan base that is very enthusiastic, even excited about law enforcement on a technical level approaching airplane simulator fans. If you were to try and replicate a SWAT game, you have an uphill battle from a mechanics and design perspective, and you also have a market issue. You're making a police game in the 2020s with a social sensitivity around policing that was not in the mainstream during the 2000s. You can fail in so many different ways with this kind of project, so what brass, bald mega chads would take on such a challenge? I wanted somebody to do it because I knew I was not alone in wanting SWAT 5. You could say I was ready. My first exposure to Ready or Not was through trailers. I didn't want to get excited about it right away. I mean, small unit indoor tactics, CQB, door breaching. You have my attention, but not my hope. Trailers are trailers. Well, by December 2021, Ready or Not had an early access Steam release, and we are now 2 years, give or take, into that release. Despite losing their initial publisher for reasons somewhat unknown, Void Interactive are still chugging along on development with very regular updates and community interaction, which all point towards commitment to a 1.0 release. So you can have my hope. I will now ask for your patience. In order to construct a logical base for arguments I'm going to make later, I have to answer the question, why would the game you choose to end a series on SWAT be Ready or Not? This is really perfunctory. You know Ready or Not is SWAT 5. I know Ready or Not is SWAT 5, but there are going to be some people in the comments who just don't get it. They don't say they're making SWAT 5, you just want SWAT 5. You're desperate for your one and only perfect precious police simulator to have a sequel, loser. I also know that SWAT 5 is what I want, and a whole bunch of internet gamer news outlets mirrored the sentiment that Ready or Not is SWAT's spiritual successor, which by the nature of the messenger makes me feel the need to question. So, I gotta make the argument, and it's actually amusing how much Ready or Not and SWAT 4 are practically dead ringers for each other. First of all, the game's names rhyme, we can start with that. The whole visual and audioscape is super similar with the same callouts and terminology that SWAT 4 used. The voice profiles for your officers and talk are even fairly similar.
Why are you treating me like a criminal?
Civilian ready to evacuate.
Roger that. Trailer standing by.
There they are.
Civilian is secured.
Talk to high ground. Copy entry team notifying trailers.
On the visual front, the picture-in-picture helmet cam is dead on, the same color scheme for the elements, the same interface for interacting with doorways, same tools for door breaching and environment traversal, even the door and corner mirror. Despite multiple commercial and military form factors, you got a similar 3D model to SWAT 4. If you didn't think that SWAT 5 was what Ready or Not was going for, it'd be funny. And why should it change? SWAT 4 was, for what it was trying to do, very complete. It's got pretty much everything you need. You got your corner mirroring, you got your suspect compliance, you got your less than lethal beanbags and pepper balls, and most importantly, your officer score that lets you know if you were a good cop. If Glock can make the same pistol 20 years in a row and call each one perfection, I think we can say the same about a SWAT 4 Total remake with practically no changes. Ready or Not has some big shoes to fill, though, and I think we also wanted more than SWAT 4. We wanted SWAT 5. And I didn't get it. The sequel, a replication and improvement on formula. So, what does Ready or Not do that SWAT doesn't do? Is Ready or Not a worthy successor to the SWAT title, spiritually? Well, most obviously, the graphics are better. We got more polygons, more lighting effects, and very importantly, aim down sights. It's the one thing that shows SWAT's age more than anything else is the 90s standard zoom in rather than ADS, and Ready or Not has modernized this. You have more scopes and attachments on offer now too, as well as a whole lot more guns to choose from. I don't know if I'm going to take a 5.7 into a situation where I'm very concerned about barrier over penetration, but I do like cosplaying an SG-1, and the P90 is pretty OP from an in-game meta perspective. The point is that you can probably take your favorite shooter in Ready or Not, and stick whatever tactical doodads on there that you want. I'm pretty basic, just give me an SBR with a red dot and a light and I'll be good. The second big improvement is also age-related, and that is native multiplayer through Steam. Playing SWAT 4 with friends was an ITT Technical Institute level complicated when it came to kludging a multiplayer lobby together from disparate IPs. We were able to use Game Ranger in the 2010s to make our own servers, but there was still some patching to be done. Everybody's got to have the right versions, etc. 70-80% of the time it worked out every time. That's still a couple more steps than is comfortable, and being able to jump into a match with friends with one click, that's where it's at. Our Ready or Not lobbies through Steam were largely good. We had some disconnecting at times, and the lobby interface is somewhat lacking, but by God, I only had to click one button. Lastly, the movement mechanics were much improved, on the player end at least. I mentioned in my SWAT 4 video that having gun length translate into poor indoors maneuverability would be a plus, and lo and behold, it is so. Close by doorways and furniture jams your long guns up, short weapons have less stability or accuracy, but you can shoot almost anywhere, and that makes me happy. Moving while shooting is a lot more comfortable as well. The expanding reticles of the past, say 2000s, were very strict. Punitively so. At some point in the Tom Clancy days, some military or police consultant must have sat the developers down and had them actually try to hit something with a gun while moving around just to show the Poindexters, golly, Mr. Cop, this sure is hard. The bounding reticle was a reasonable fix for the time. So reasonable, in fact, it was used again and again to simulate the stability problem with movement and gunplay. Rainbow Six used this in every iteration during the 2000s. Other games like Band of Brothers just made all the guns terribly inaccurate and boosted the recoil on everything so that accurate shooting was near impossible. Some aspect of these older tactical games was taking control away from the player in order to emphasize the game's strategic elements. In Rainbow, for example, only some of your operators could shoot accurately at all, and you had to use them very wisely so you could get your job done. Today, there exists more of a compromise. As developers' control over 3D models, cameras, and movement becomes more sophisticated, alternatives to what felt like very random and punitive systems have been developed. Instead of simply making certain guns more inaccurate, you start to see more subtle design elements. Things like left to right versus up and down recoil patterns, the aforementioned weapon length in close quarters, jamming up your shooting, reduction in control sensitivity with bigger weapons, delay time from shooting from the hip to aiming down sights, ADS reticle sway while maneuvering, a whole host of neat tweaks that have been developed over time that have turned randomized spray patterns into player controllable elements. It is certainly a change in design philosophy to have more player control over gunfights, but it's also thanks to all these design and control innovations that we can have a compromise between pure strategy and twitch shooting. Ready or Not, like SWAT before it, is on the cutting edge of this compromise. These 3 improvements, better UI, better movement and handling, and integrated multiplayer, seem to be a matter of course in the process of making a quality modern shooter, but it's not like they're automatic. It still takes work to implement these things. SWAT was actually on the cutting edge of where tactical games were improving within each iteration, and it's actually cool to look back at the SWAT series plus Ready or Not, make the step-by-step improvements that shooter development overall have made in the past 20 years very clear. There are really only a couple of places where SWAT 4 did things better than the current state of Ready or Not. One on the visual level is that Ready or Not's red and blue squads are not easy to tell apart from each other. SWAT 4 had big, bold, colored font on the back vests of these guys, and I know it's maybe a little less realistic to do that, but it's a wonderful visual index of who is positioned where. It's kind of a smaller issue, bit of a nitpick. A bigger problem I see is the need for drastic rebalancing of the AI around use of force. Most of the game modes have a fairly relaxed rules of engagement. I think Barricaded Suspects, the easiest mode, the entry-level mode that all maps have by default, has the strictest rules. You can't shoot at suspects without them being hostile to you, and that's pretty much what you want in your SWAT game. Problem is, even the most restrictive ROE doesn't change your approach in Ready or Not because it feels like the suspects start in the hostile state around 90% of the time. That includes through doors, before you've announced that you're cops even. Those things that make for very bad shoots in the real world. There are for sure real world examples of cops and SWAT officers just gunning down the first person they see with a gun in their hands on the scene, and sometimes the cops catch murder charges for it, and sometimes rightfully so. It just doesn't feel like a SWAT team game without the consequences for a bad shoot. If you can just blast all the armed dudes in a map, then this game is just another Rainbow Six or Ghost Recon or Squad. It's not a SWAT-like game with those special qualities that gave SWAT its character, charm, and uniqueness. This is where that logical foundation I was talking about before comes in, the argument that Ready or Not is trying to mimic SWAT, because this difference in mission and scope of gameplay is what I came back to SWAT for again and again, and if Ready or Not doesn't have it, I feel like something is lost in the translation. I don't know the specifics about the actual program behavior of Ready or Not's AI, but I feel SWAT 4 executed this better, even if it was sloppier or more artificial looking. Suspects would generally be in a neutral state upon your arrival, and when they saw you, they might enter a fight, flight, or surrender decision-making process. You would yell for compliance, and that would force the decision if they hadn't started that process, and you could do things with non-lethal and lethal tools to push them towards compliance, like pepper spray, CS gas, flashbangs, etc. Shooting before they telegraphed they were going to engage, like running to cover, running towards a hostage, or pointing their guns at you, would result in bad points. And yeah, sometimes it felt too constricting. Sometimes you knew for sure that AI thug was gonna start blasting, and the AI switched to compliance at the last second or some damn thing, and you got bad points for bad reasons. It was still better than the current state of Ready or Not's AI, where the best tactic is to blow through the level with a very high confidence that you're not going to get a bad shoot, even when you're shooting blind through doors and shooting unaware suspects in the back of the head. You're not getting dinged for it, and you're going to do it every time. Everything else from the AI I really like. When they want to go aggro, the AI can be really cunning. The flanking behaviors are very solid, and they can and do lie in wait for you to come to them. I love that they can hide under beds and in closets and stuff. The fake surrenders feel spot on, and I'm particularly fond of the fake outs some of the civilians do, like quickly plunging their hands into their back pockets to get the clout box out. The change to what I want would be very easy. Just push the starting percentage of being in aggro mode way lower, or push the surrender chance higher, just like what some of the more popular mods on the workshop do right now at this very moment. I guess I'm not alone in this desire. This doesn't even have to be a zero-sum game. Just tweak the Barricaded Suspects mode to please people like me, keep the raid, bomb defusal, and active shooter modes the way they are now. Then I'm happy, I get my SWAT 5 experience. The general audience is happy, they have game modes that are more blasty, and it's still realistic. Active shooter? Yeah, after the first couple innocents dead, we're probably past asking for compliance. I think if they made something like this change before Ready or Not left early access, it would improve the game drastically. Also, maybe stop the AI from doing this dumb Marco Polo game where you can trick them into revealing their hiding spots by shouting for compliance. That's very inauthentic. I use that word here because I'm rusty at transitions, and because I think that that's the core of what I'm trying to say about SWAT and Ready or Not as a whole. You can come to a game like this and look at what I'm saying and say, why do you care? Why do you care about whether the bad guys surrender fast or slow, or if the recoil is or isn't realistic? You're shooting guns, bad guys fall down, you're having fun, who cares? Well, you lovely realism nerd, you and I know we care. But why? Give me a little bit of leeway here again, because I've got a point coming and this is only temporarily unrelated. Why is realism important? Particularly in something like a video game made for entertainment, where you're not trying to educate necessarily, and you're not trying to recreate historical events for the purposes of theory crafting solutions or role-playing. Thematically, the appeal of realism to me is that the characters in this fictional scenario we've created for entertainment have more limits to their actions. It's like the Batman versus Superman argument. Batman is a more appealing character than Superman because he isn't an invincible flying Jesus with laser eyes. He has to work harder to achieve his goals. They are, of course, both fictional characters dealing with invented challenges using tailor-made contrivances. Batman often does have Deus Ex Machina on his side, being the world's greatest detective slash ninja with the world's most clairvoyant belt. Anti-shark bat spray. Listen, he just knew there'd be sharks, okay? Now, the point is that the closer the hero is to the average Joe, the more difficult these extraordinary challenges would be for them. The greater the danger, the higher the tension, the more interesting the solution. When you shift this idea from pure fiction to interactive fiction, now you, the player, must work harder to come up with more interesting solutions to less extreme problems. The problems in realistic games can be more human-sized problems, and the heroes can be more relatable, as in, I could, theoretically, be that guy. And perhaps you know that it would take a hell of a lot more time in the dojo than you're willing to commit to be able to save the president from ninjas, but damn it, you could do it. This isn't a power fantasy, this is a power training simulator. Actually going and saving the president from ninjas, that'd probably be a real hassle. You'd probably have to get some plane tickets and a security clearance or something, and you'd have to be there at the right time and the right place to catch the ninjas. The authentic president ninja saving scenario would probably actually involve a lot of boredom and logistics. Authenticity and entertainment are often opposing forces, but if done right, they can be good friends. Your video game has to be fun, full stop. How that remains is up to you, but that's the bare minimum. Authenticity for its own sake may be something where the general audience really won't care for the sake of their entertainment, but the people who are enthusiastic about law enforcement, that's where the juice is, man. Your guaranteed audience, if you can be authentic enough. We're talking about stupid nerd shit like which side of the cuffs should be up, zip ties or not, how much CS gas is flammable, ceramic or steel plates, all those things that are deservedly the background noise of games like this, and I love it. Now, the authentic elements can synergize with the entertaining elements. Technical details about guns and armor and room breaching become different tools and gameplay methods. The boring stuff, like paperwork or communications planning or formulation of strategy, becomes a pacing element, vital preparation for a more dangerous situation. With such synergy, the more authentic you can get, the more entertaining you can get, to a certain degree and with some limitations. You are also trying to avoid fake authenticity, the Law and Order Ice-T explaining what a gamer term is, product of TV producers talking to TV producers and creating this bizarre thing at the end of a long game of telephone which resembles reality only vaguely and which create genuine cultural myths about policing. Well, what could be more authentic than taking people's actual experiences and replicating them virtually? You could even do what Total War does, where they recreate historical battles. You could recreate some real-life SWAT situations, like, This is how you can get into the crosshairs for real. It is a big, huge, donut and cheesesteak belly-sized gamble to try and recreate anything from the real world in your SWAT team game. Recreating real events where people died and putting them into a video game, that could be genuinely insensitive. My big bugbear has always been Waco. It's one of those events that people theorycraft constantly. What would I do if I were there? How could this been done differently or better? And the cultural significance of the event gives it a lot of street cred. But I always get a nasty feeling in the pit of my gut when Waco particularly gets replicated in a game. If you want to know why, check out some documentaries on the event. I don't really feel like going over it here, and my monetization doesn't either. Incidents like Waco or Ruby Ridge are my own untouchable scenarios, but you may have your own scenario where you think, you know what, maybe this shouldn't be replicated for our entertainment. The problem is that Columbine, Pulse Nightclub, Waco, Charlie Hebdo, Munich 72 Olympic Games, Parkland, Covenant School, these are where the public gets to see police rapid response teams. These are the authentic, real-world scenarios where if you are trying to get to truth or the true, authentic experience of policing in the SWAT team context, this is where the learning happens. And it's a giant minefield because you either depict the events down to photorealistic detail to remain true to reality and literally create Columbine Simulator officially fucking with the heads of actual people who actually lived through it, or you arbitrage some of them and risk lensing the event to a particular viewpoint or trivializing it altogether. This is not a new issue, not even in gaming. I remember back when, I think it was Medal of Honor Frontline was coming out, and I was talking to a friend about it. My friend had a grandparent who had been through World War II, and I wanted to know what he thought of the game. The developers had very meticulously crafted the Normandy Beach landing mission, trying to be exactly what it was on the historic day. They recorded audio of the guns at ranges and worked from photographs and testimonials to try and capture this functionally incomprehensible moment that only a few had come away from. The vet, to my recollection, had responded, "How goddamn dare you? My friends died on that beach and you turned it into a game. For fun." And I can see the guy's point. I bet he wished he could just run over to grab the medkit from the shell crater to revive his dead friends. Games come with their own interpretations of reality. While trying to be as realistic as possible, you still have arbitrations on that reality for the sake of making the game fun. I don't think it was the developers' intention to be disrespectful. Quite the opposite. When it came to the Normandy Beach section, they wanted to capture it as the gruesome, incomprehensibly awful, heroic event that it was, deliberately to show respect for the men who died there and the men who lived through it. Maybe through their portrayal, a younger generation can comprehend this event and appreciate its enormity. And PTSD exists. And if you're the guy or gal who lived through the thing and the kid comes up to you and says, "I got a high score on Normandy," does that help you? And PTSD exists, and the military has for years now been experimenting rather successfully at treating it using virtual environments tailored explicitly to the survivor's exact scenario. It's my friend's grandfather's right to be upset, and it's the artist's right to portray Normandy, and it's our right to buy Medal of Honor Frontline and play it and enjoy it. All of these things can be true at once. Does it matter that Normandy happened 60 years ago and you can play it in Medal of Honor, but the Pulse Nightclub massacre happened 8 years ago and you can kind of play it in Ready or Not? How long ago do things have to be to depict them in entertainment? That's a discussion that's been around forever too. I mean, I know guys who can't help but laugh uproariously in any time, in any context, a small object strikes one of two large, upright, parallel, oblong cubes. And for some people, 9/11 is still untouchable. It would have been easier for Ready or Not to sidestep the issue entirely. Make the nightclub map a replica of John Wick, like the basement is actually. "Oh no, Russian mobsters have taken over the nightclub to steal their cocaine." Perhaps that's a bit cartoonish, but you know what I mean. Nobody's gonna be hurt or offended other than the cocaine bear Russian mobsters. And are they really gonna whack you over a video game? Hell, maybe, but they probably won't write any articles about it. Ready or Not chose not to do this. At least in some areas, they went with the inspired by real events model, and that is a shortcut to authenticity, yes. And it's a minefield, too. Maybe approaching these topics is similar to approaching an event like this in real life. There may be no perfect solution or happy ending for everyone. You may have to do the best you can if you're going to be involved at all. I think where Ready or Not does definitely trip up is in tone setting. The Vol Mansion, for example, has a very darkly ironic story in its level design. Mix the cheerful birthday party outside with the boner statues inside, and top it all off with dead exploited kids buried in the basement. Aside from being a little bit sensationalistic, the tone of the level is overall appropriate for the subject matter. But the smaller jokes buried within the level don't feel like they fit, almost. They're closer to how GTA did humor, pissfosser and twat, people's names being double entendres, that sort of thing. It's mostly in these smaller puns where the discordancy comes in for me, and that's across the board with Ready or Not's level design. As far as I can otherwise tell, Ready or Not is not really meant to be that sort of gaudy clown world. My initial impression was that it was meant to be deadly dark serious, a grim city on the edge of collapse without a hero to save them, Gotham without Batman. In such a world, you can appeal to the graveyard humor that I know from experience a lot of first responders share. The kind of humor that comes from seeing people at their best and at their worst, and sometimes having to laugh, otherwise you'll cry at the absurd nightmare that people sometimes find themselves in. These puns that I find discordant aren't graveyard humor. They are world-building elements that make the world itself an absurd place. It's also a bit inconsistent, and some of the levels have clear visual puns, and some are played totally straight. You know what? A little bit of inconsistency with the world building, most people wouldn't notice if it were not for the sensitive cultural context that Ready or Not is trying to insert into. Humor is deeply subjective. Something that looks like clever, dark irony to one person might look like mockery to another. The safest bet for Ready or Not would have been to keep to a more deadly, dark, serious world building. In such a world, I think you could depict, say, a school active shooting like they say they want to do. This depiction would be brutal and dark, but it wouldn't have irony or satire, certainly not jokes or mockery. And even if they did that, even if they made the school level, let's say, turn it into a technical college with adult students, make the active shooters wear full-body gray jumpsuits and say absolutely nothing, give them generic voice lines, put their guns into little plastic bags so you can't see what kind they are, there will still be people who play the school level for the meme, and there will still be people who are pissed off that you made the school level in the first place. I'm all about transgressive art, even when it transgresses against me, in the sense that I don't think you should be stopped from making something creative based on potential public outcry, even if it's genuinely offensive. If Ready or Not made the Waco level, I may just say, that's fucked up, not play that level. On the other hand, my reticence about making a Waco level is that I think it's a zero-win scenario. I don't think you can win Waco as a police force. Actually, you know what? A good example for me that they're actually putting into the game now is the streamer level, which exists to the public at the time of this writing only as a trailer. Just based on the tone of this trailer, I feel like Void don't get the reason swatting is a heinous crime. It's an attempted murder, where you, as the police, are now accomplices to a planned murder. The suspect is the victim. There's no conceivable way you are the heroes as the SWAT team. All you can do is not fuck up by committing the murder the swatter wants to happen. If you're playing a video game, you want to try and win, and being put into a scenario where you can't win, you can't have a feel-good moment, you can only not make a bad situation worse, that's risky. You might alienate some players. I think that's why Void has bent a lot of the scenario's backstory towards the cops always being in the right. You're always busting down the doors on the bad guys. Case in point, the streamer trailer. Their backstory is that after the SWAT team broke down the doors for the reported hostage situation, finding no hostages and no emergency, they do find illegal bitcoins. Whatever those are, it's kind of like illegal money. I don't understand Bitcoin. Seems like a contrived reason to make the swatting look justified. You don't need that detail to execute the level. Moreover, it's inauthentic. I know Void is from the UK, they may have a different due process, but have you ever heard of the fruit of the poison tree? You can't use that evidence even if you wanted to. Even if there was a mountain of cocaine on the dude's table, if you were only in that house for an emergency entrance, you're gonna get ass smacked by any judge worth their salt in court for any charges unrelated to that emergency entrance. Plain sight be damned. Unless use of such warrantless raids that gather unrelated evidence is somehow legal in Ready or Not's United States, and in that case, we're definitely in a nightmarish dystopia. I mean, it would be really miserable to live in a country ran by an overbearing government, wouldn't it? I'll step back for a moment, because such a scenario where there's no happy ending could be improved. It would be a new frontier if Ready or Not was to introduce a literal no-win scenario, a SWAT Kobayashi Maru. That's something that's just not done in gaming, and it would be brave to subject your audience to something like this. A scenario where it becomes clear that there's no winning, that maybe they're not the heroes and they can't have a do-over. I think that this would have value past that novelty though. Part of the trauma from these events in real life is feeling like you didn't do enough, or you could have done something different to lead to a different outcome. It's not entertaining per se to recreate these feelings, but it can be that there is no perfect answer or solution to something that happens to you. There's only the best you can do at that time. That's the nature of dealing with these events and those like them. And sometimes you have to forgive yourself for not being perfect, not being Superman or Batman, leaving your anti-shark bat spray at home that day. Sometimes you have to prostrate yourself in front of reality and say, "Forgive me, I am but mortal." And it would be a much better world if we could also forgive those other than ourselves who are also not perfect. So, if Ready or Not makes the school level or the Waco level and it's totally miserable and I hate it, I will offer my critique. I will also know that they walked into a minefield as mortals and they are not perfect, and I forgive them if they step on a mine. I think Ready or Not has some work ahead of it, but right now, it's got a pretty solid base. I think they could make the tone of the levels fit each other better, and I think some of their storytelling is drifting towards the sensationalism that shows like Law & Order fail their audience with, and I want the AI dial shifted a bit. That said, I think they could hit a solid 1.0 release in like 6 months. They are just about 80% towards being the SWAT 5 that I wanted. Plus, the way the game is set up, they could add official maps and community maps after release super easily over and over. I would love to see recreations of some older SWAT 3 and SWAT 4 maps for sure. Point is that this infrastructure seems really geared well towards future editions. As for a recommendation, for me, Ready or Not is a buy. I think they're making it out of early access, and I think the amount of content they have now is only just below sufficient for the price point. Maybe just barely there. It's a hard gut call. If you're skeptical about that, give it 6 months. I think they'll have more stuff up that'll make it a worthy $40 spent. With everything that I've said, ultimately, I'm glad this game is being made. For a good long while, I did feel on the margins where there's this really cool game idea, but there are really only 2 of them and they're not that popular. Ready or Not has gotten a whole lot of support, and that shows me that I probably wasn't as alone as I thought. This is something a lot of people want. So, I'm happy. I like this. And I'm ready. I had to say that. I couldn't finish the video without saying that at least once. Oh wait, hey, it's twice. Never mind.
Bastards! On the ground now! Police, on your knees!